Who is the man? He's a lover, he's a fighter, he's a walker. Chef! Can you dig it? He never gets tired, never wears out his shoes. For non-stop walking, check out BBC 2. Chef! Man, this guy can walk. Saturday, 5 to 9 on BBC 2. Steamrolled.
Scotland's defence shakes its head.
Italy just run out of defenders.
Scotland have no answer.
Italy are back to reality.
And it won't get any easier.
That is a magnificent try. The baby-faced assassin has done it again.
And Lansdowne Road takes off. A fantastic performance from Ireland.
The Six Nations continues. It's Scotland, France at 2 and Ireland, Italy at 4. Live in Grandstand, Saturday on BBC 1.
Now on BBC 2, Newsnight.
This couple have bred their baby specifically to sell it. It could be yours for $20,000. We uncover the scandal of Romania's baby trade. Good evening. There's a country in the heart of Europe where, if you've got a few $1,000s to spare, you can buy a child. Tonight we report on the industrialization of the human womb in modern Romania and how an adoption mafia is exploiting the desperation of Western Europeans for children. Ken Livingstone still won't say whether he's running for mayor. What's his game? And why is it that last week the broadcasters dragged their feet over an appeal to help flood victims in Mozambique, but tomorrow they'll put one out? How television pictures define the limits of compassion. It's 10 years now since the rest of Europe discovered that another European country, Romania, has tens of thousands of children being kept in appalling conditions in state-run nurseries. There was an instant outpouring of sympathy and offers of adoption. While the overwhelming number of adoptions from Romania are legal, the rules were tightened again only last year, it's one of the more melancholy facts of life that for every general impulse of human compassion, there's a small minority willing to exploit it. The European Union has now warned Romania that it had better clean up the racketeers abusing the adoption system there if it wants to stand a chance of joining. Our special correspondent, Sue Lloyd-Roberts, has been investigating the illegal adoption racket.
On the outskirts of most towns in Romania, you find a casa de copii, a house of children. They're often understaffed and bursting at the seams, with young boys and girls desperate for attention. Only a small minority of the 140,000 children in state institutions are who we would describe as orphans. Most of them have been abandoned by their parents. I asked the director how many of them here had parents. She said she didn't know. Their papers had been lost. There are many such children in Romania today, without proper adult supervision, without known identities, and therefore vulnerable to exploitation. The villages of Romania are among the poorest in Europe, not helped by the insistence by former President Ceausescu that every woman should have at least 5 children. Birth control was and still is largely unheard of. The country is poorer today than it was even under the previous regime. And then and now parents say they still take their children, whom they can't feed, to the local orphanage. At first everyone thought we were here to buy a baby. When we told them we were investigating illegal adoptions, we were immediately referred to a house, which was little more than a ruin, on the edge of the village, and to a grief-stricken father.
I took the children to the orphanage so that they wouldn't die. They would have certainly have died if they'd stayed here in the village. They never came back. They said the first child was sick. With the second child, I yelled at the director, "Let me see my boy." She told me he wasn't there. He had gone away. To a foreigner like you. What could I do? She didn't give me any money, not even to reimburse my journey to the orphanage.
The orphanage is an hour's drive away in the town of Campalung. While the majority of adoptions in Romania are carried out legally, the critics say it's because the adoption business has been privatized in Romania that you get illegal practices, like the orphanage at Campalong, which I'd been warned is little more than a baby shop charging inflated prices. Using a secret camera with a translator, we paid a call. If you adopt a baby legally through the British and Romanian authorities, it can take years. It would cost about £2,000, and a baby is selected for you who is a genuine orphan or who has been genuinely abandoned by his parents. Telling the director, Dr. Babush, that I was a wealthy woman who wanted to choose a baby, she showed me around the orphanage, in between taking calls on her mobile phone. Such access is forbidden in Romania. She never asked to see my papers. Maybe she assumed I had permission from the UK. There were 60 or so babies here. They all looked clean and fed, but all shared the rocking motion of babies suffering from neglect. She offered me 3 boys to choose from. I asked whether their mothers had given their permission.
We have all the old files, with addresses, signatures and everything. We'll forge the signature. Who on earth will check? We buy the parents some cardboard rolls to cover the roofs of their houses, bread, a few bags of corn flour and so on. They never complain.
So are you saying I simply stay in England and await the baby?
No.
She said yes, and so that I could have the baby by this summer, she explained that she would have to bribe local officials and that the official foundation through which all adoptions must go in Romania would expect $15,000, and she would welcome a similar sum for her orphanage's needs.
If you like them and want them with all your heart, you will have them.
Dr. Babush has enough friends among the local police, medical and government officials to be able to operate effectively. One of these people agreed to talk to me anonymously.
When a child is left at the orphanage, it's their policy not to tell the parents that they must visit the child at least once in 6 months. Otherwise, they automatically lose their parental rights and the child becomes the responsibility of the authorities. The very day after the 6 months expire, the legal papers are always ready to establish abandonment. Mothers have said that the police have forced them to withdraw their complaints, to shut up or there will be trouble. And of course some mothers are happy to produce babies for Dr. Babush, children to order.
Mr. and Mrs. Preboy are some of Dr. Babush's most trusted suppliers. Because they produce healthy babies and they don't cause trouble, the doctor pays them $1,000 a baby. They've given 6 children to Dr. Babush, and the mother showed me photos of her twins now in America. I was still posing as someone wanting to adopt a baby, and the father was keen to impress me.
The director knows when we have had a new baby, and she takes it to the orphanage and keeps it separate, so it doesn't catch any diseases. She gives the baby better clothes and better food. We've had no problems with her. She's taken care of all our children.
But this is the main source of income. He said yes, producing babies is their main source of income. They suggested I take baby Nico back home with me. As they began to bargain, I began to realize what people mean when they talk about Romania's industrialization of the womb. I made my excuses and left. We headed towards Bucharest, where I'd heard that it's even easier to buy babies, and a friend showed me that the best place in the city to buy was around the courthouse. Within half an hour, we were offered 3. This gypsy woman offered us her sister's child. Another gypsy offered her as yet unborn baby. She said it would be her 9th, and she simply couldn't afford to feed another. This man explained that babies weren't his business, but when I said I was prepared to pay a lot of hard currency in cash, he asked me to meet him later that night. Constantine brought with him a 4-year-old girl. 100. He said he wanted to check the notes of the $10,000 I was to give him. Then he'd prepare the papers and the girl would be mine. I turned my back on the 7th child I had been offered in Romania in as many days. It was now clear that people are desperate to sell, but how do they get on when they try getting the child abroad? I arranged to meet a young newspaper journalist who, with the temerity of youth, has exposed what he calls the international adoption mafia in Romania. His main target has been the woman who is generally recognized as the chief trader in babies in the country, Elena Bustea. How big is her business?
I've asked around and heard that the amounts range between $10,000 to $20,000 per child, plus the money needed to bribe people. With that kind of money, she can afford to buy protection. And every year, she handles adoptions for some 300 to 400 children, so her profit over 10 years could be $30 million.
I telephoned Elena Bustea and repeated my story that I was rich but divorced and probably considered too old to adopt, and so I didn't have the essential permissions from the UK. She asked me to come round the next day and she said she would help me, but by the time I arrived, she changed her tune.
In Romania, we must respect the law as the Romanian law is normal here in Romania. And after that, we cannot do anything for you because you must have all the documents from your state, from where you come to adopt in Romania.
But some foreigners who get to deal with Elena Bustea regret it, especially in Italy and in Spain, where, with these countries' falling birth rates, there are fewer controls than in Britain. Like Signor and Signora Mantiani, an Italian couple. They went to Romania and met the girl they were told they could adopt and spent a month with her. They paid $18,000, but the child never arrived when they returned to Italy.
We hope they will stop this business. They shouldn't be allowed to mess with young children and deceive people. They showed the same child to 8 or 9 couples, but obviously only one was lucky enough to adopt the child. But they took money from all the couples, and that's why she has lots of money and power over there.
This couple too paid money to Bustea and never got their child. They asked to remain anonymous because they'd received threatening phone calls from Romania. The Italian police are now investigating theirs and several other cases. And there are the young victims of what people call the adoption mafia, like Peter Mustafa, who lives with temporary foster parents in Romania. 2 years ago, she was to be adopted by an American family. She still has the photos of her prospective parents, but it fell through because her identity had been stolen by Elena Bustea. We traced her parents, who told us that when Peter was born 5 years ago, like many parents, they decided they couldn't afford to keep her, and they were approached by an agent.
He said he would give me $100 for the baby, and he took her birth certificate. But he gave back the baby, kept the birth certificate, and never gave us any money. So we put her in an orphanage.
Since then, Peter has never seen her parents. She's been abandoned twice in her short life, and now has no hope of being adopted.
The records show that a girl of the name of Peter Mustafa had already been adopted by a Spanish family. Her name had already been used. I never thought I'd see something like this. It's very painful to see that there are people who trade in children's souls.
The case was referred to the Bucharest Police Organised Crime Prevention Unit. I went back to our Stefan, who has now been told by his bosses that he can no longer write about Elena Bustea, whether the police have investigated.
Though we have had a succession of governments, no one has ever touched this woman. At a point, all police investigations have had to stop. It's obviously a forbidden subject. Romania's image abroad could suffer if there's evidence of an organized network that's selling children.
I arranged to meet one of the 2 police officers who, while investigating Elena Bustea, were demoted from the Criminal Investigation Department and put back on the beat. But he changed his mind about talking to me. He said he was on the verge of a mental breakdown over the whole business, and anyway, to keep his job, he would need permission from the Ministry of Interior, which he clearly would never get, according to Romania's former Prime Minister.
Once I knew that the 2 police officers were on the case, I contacted the Interior Ministry, but, although I gave the investigation my full backing, the officers were taken off the case. I think, although I cannot go into detail, but based on what is being said about the woman who owns this adoption business, I think that these people enjoy protection at the highest political level.
You say the investigation was stopped at the highest level, but there is no higher level over a Prime Minister, apart from the President. Did it come from there?
You can draw your own conclusions regarding at which level this intervention came.
The habit of dumping babies was formed under communism. Once the horror was revealed, the West stepped in with usually good intentions. Sadly, this collision of cultures has left some of Romania's most vulnerable children the victims.
We're joined now from Brussels by Emma Nicholson, MEP, who has a close interest in Romania, has raised money for Romanian orphanages, visits the place frequently, and in addition is the European Parliament's rapporteur on Romania's attempts to join the European Union. Emma Nicholson, this is a scandalous state of affairs. Is there anything that can be done to bring pressure on the Romanians?
There are more children now in orphanages in Romania than there were when Ceausescu fell. And I think our principal target should be restore those children to their own families. Instead, the West has concentrated either on adopting and bringing them back overseas, bringing them to the United Kingdom or to other European nations, or we've spent money on trying to shrink the institutions. I think that policy has failed, and we now have to target the children and the families and restore them to their own families. Children in Romania don't have child benefit, for example. If we were able to provide sufficient trickle of funds to give those families money to keep their children, all but a handful of bad people would desperately want to keep their children at home. At the moment, they're breaking the United Nations Convention for Human Rights, where children have every right to stay at home with their parents. I'm sure that's not what Romania wants, and I'm sure that with additional help, we can achieve the impossible and get those children into their own homes where they belong.
But quite clearly there are some people involved in this racket who appear to operate on entirely different principles. For example, the couple we saw there who were deliberately breeding children as a source of income. Now, this is something so outside our terms of reference that one wonders whether any pressure can be brought to bear on those people.
Frankly, those people have no principles of any sort. It's not a question of operating on principles. They have none because they sell their children. This is the legacy of both communism and extreme fascism. It isn't the Romania that I've heard of before the war, which had very good childcare policies, where children who were orphaned, genuinely orphaned, and these children aren't orphaned as we've seen. They're not orphaned in any sense of the word. They've been given away. Before the war, children orphaned used to be taken in by the extended family. So I think there is a bedrock of historical perception of how much children matter that's been swept away by this horrible 50 years, which has distorted Romania's lives and the lives of so many of Romania's children and young people. But yes, the European Union potential entry offers the window of opportunity for Romania, and that's the thing we're working on, to try to get Romania quickly to come in line, to honour human rights, to honour children's rights particularly. The European Union has made children's rights, institutionalised child protection, getting them back to their families, as one of our top two priorities.
But
that is a free market.
There cannot be any question of Romania having any closer dealings with the European Union as long as this trade goes on, can there?
There can be no question of Romania or any other nation entering the European Union until they honour human rights. In this case, with Romania, it is children's rights. But you can't say you can't have closer relationships. Indeed, we must have closer relationships. We've opened the accession process with Romania on February the 14th. I was in Romania last week myself for the whole week working on these things. So yes, we must get close to Romania. Romania hopes to become a member of the European Union. We must do everything we can to help her honour human rights, children's rights, so then she can come in.
But what leverage does the European Union have?
The European Union has enormous influence, and on top of that we have great capacity to help. We have experts, we have people who go in to help in the ministries, who are helping with the process. I myself, as rapporteur, I represent the European Parliament for Romania. Mr. Verheugen, our Enlargement Commissioner, represents the Commission. And all of us are working immensely hard to assist Romania come into the European Human Rights Convention, and that means the UN Declaration of Human Rights, which Romania signed and ratified in 1991 and 92. So that's what we've got to get in order.
Emma Nicholson, thank you for joining us. Thanks. If it weren't for the fact that Ken Livingstone says he's in deadly earnest, you would almost think he was playing an elaborate and rather cruel joke on the party he's belonged to most of his life. His official, sotto voce line is that he still hasn't made up his mind whether or not to stand as an independent candidate for Mayor of London. He claimed last night he still thought he'd be the official Labour candidate. Our political editor, Mark Mardell, has been wondering what he's up to.
These are solar flare events occurring on the surface of the sun and in the sun.
Predictions are tricky business. Piers Corbyn makes his living staring into the sun and forecasting the weather here from what he sees.
We can predict extreme events on the sun many months ahead and the corresponding extreme events on the earth, such as those big storms which hit Britain and Europe around Christmas. We predict.
But can Mr Corbyn, the strong supporter of Ken Livingstone's and brother of Labour MP Jeremy Corbyn, forecast what will happen next in the race to be mayor? A Labour Party member for 18 years, he's already resigned as a constituency campaign organiser in protest at what's happened. So why does he think Mr Livingstone won't make up his mind now?
If a delay helps Millbank Tower see reality and stop this abominable treatment of members, then I think a delay is worth having. But obviously, on the other hand, the sooner Ken states his position, if he hasn't got any choice other than to stand independently, then the better.
Do you want him to stand as an independent?
If the Labour Party leadership won't allow him to stand as Labour candidate, then I would want him to stand as an independent, the true Labour candidate, if you like, for London.
But you and he would be kicked out of the party.
Well, OK, but I'm prepared to accept that.
Tomorrow should have been overcast by an announcement from Ken Livingstone. It was to have been squally with frequent outbursts of anger within the Labour Party. In other words, Ken Livingstone was 99% certain that tomorrow he would announce he was standing as an independent. But those close to his campaign say if there's a way he can stand and still stay within the Labour Party, he has to look hard for it. They claim the forecast is now bright. For Ken, the political weather is changing.
He wants the Labour Party in London to reflect on the awful nightmare that would result if we had two Labour candidates. The party would be divided, we'd lose votes, Labour voters will go for other parties, as happened in Wales. We had a dreadful year in Wales. We can avoid that if Frank decides to stand down in favour of the candidate who won the majority of the votes.
Mr Livingstone's supporters also see a ray of sunshine in the West London constituency of Brentford and Isleworth, where the General Management Committee has voted 19-7 to call on Frank Dobson to stand aside. New Labour loyalists claim what they call sensible members weren't there. But all over London there'll be more such meetings in the next few days. Most happen at the beginning of the month, and Ken Livingstone is probably waiting for more support. A local council leader also wants Labour's official candidate to stand down.
I believe that if Ken Livingstone was the Labour Party candidate for Mayor of London in May, Labour would do significantly better than it looks as if we're going to do with Frank Dobson as the candidate. And if that led to a Labour majority on the Greater London Assembly, that, for a local authority like Hounslow, would be a major advantage compared to a situation possibly where, on a low turnout, Labour ends up with a minority in the chamber.
One reason Ken Livingstone may be making such heavy weather of his decision is to make the most of this fairly mild period. True, supporters could get irritated by his hesitation, but the media's attention is still shining benignly upon him, and the Labour Party cannot yet unleash the storm. One Labour source told me they're planning an aggressive, negative campaign, accusing Mr Livingstone of being the man you can't trust. Former spin doctors can well imagine the lightning striking.
But really probably just remind people of what Ken Livingstone said over recent months is that he wouldn't run as an independent. Indeed, he actually said that he'd back Frank Dobson if he'd win. They'd probably also remind the voters of London that this was the man who said that the Chancellor of the Exchequer should be sacked because he was responsible for recession, which has never happened. So these sort of things that Ken has said that have turned out to be wrong or turned out to be lies, then they'll remind the voters of that.
In Scotland, long-time Labour MP Dennis Canavan stood as an independent for the Scottish Parliament after being rejected by Labour as a candidate, and he won a massive victory. He says Livingstone would face a dirty campaign, but still urges him to stand.
I think he should throw his hat in the ring, because I think he should try to expose further the corrupt and scandalous selection system to which he fell victim. And I also think that he should do it because the people of London deserve a choice. Do they want a representative, a mayor who will fight for their interests, or do they simply want a puppet who will do whatever Tony Blair tells him to do?
At Hustings last week, it was the one politician who wasn't a candidate who got a standing ovation. All the signs are Ken Livingstone is taunting the Labour leadership, flirting with them enough to ensure the attacks have stopped for the time being, while preparing the ground for an action that will automatically lead to him being expelled from the party. But one of the most seasoned Ken watchers has a hunch he just won't do it in the end, ensuring he lives to fight another day.
One interpretation of this delay is that Ken has decided that in the end he won't stand, but wants to maximise the goodwill he'll get from the party by finally pulling back from the brink. And if he leaves it a bit longer, lets more people sweat, he'll then get the maximum payback. That payback could be useful if at some hoped-for future point the Blair experiment finally fails, the left rise to the top of the party again. And if you look back through things that Ken Livingstone has said and written over the years, there's a real expectation that at some future point this inevitably will happen, that the left will gain control, perhaps with Ken Livingstone right at the top.
There's relative calm at the moment. Ken Livingstone will make his announcement either way in 2 weeks' time. If he does stand against Frank Dobson, a storm will rip through the London Labour Party. High pressure and severe depressions may follow.
Well, with us in the studio now, Anne Keane, who is Frank Dobson's Sancho Panza in this campaign, and Billy Bragg joins us from Exeter. Billy Bragg, what do you reckon Ken Livingstone ought to do?
Well, I personally think that by waiting to see what might happen in the Labour Party, he's playing a much longer game than perhaps the media want him to do. Everyone seems to be shouting in the media for him to jump. I think he still stands a good chance of becoming a Labour candidate.
Oh, because Frank Dobson would stand down?
Well, you know, Ken has the moral authority of getting the most votes in the election for the candidate, and I think people inside and outside the Labour Party want to see democracy take effect. And I think it's possible. There is a growing, over the last few days, there is a growing momentum in this campaign to ask Frank to stand aside.
And Keane, how has Frank Dobson reacted to that pressure?
Well, as you'd expect Frank to. I mean, he is the selected Labour candidate. He's the official candidate. In other words, Frank won the election.
That's not quite an answer. How is he reacting to all the pressure, saying that morally he ought to stand aside for the man who is the popular choice?
Well, Frank is the elected candidate, and Frank's out there campaigning like we were today, and as he has always been throughout this entire process.
But, I mean, Frank Dobson's a lifelong Labour Party man. He's an honourable man.
Absolutely.
He must feel deeply uncomfortable.
Well, Frank's made it clear throughout the whole process that this is not how he would have had it run, and has been very fair throughout the process on saying that. And equally, Ken has said on numerous occasions, for me to hear him alone, that he would accept the outcome of this election and back the winner. Indeed, he thought Frank or Glenda would equally make excellent candidates and mayors for London. So we believe what Ken said.
So Billy Bragg.
That the whole election is going to be fought now in London, not about the issues for London, but about the issue of Frank Dobson. And I've seen him on a number of occasions say himself, I don't like the way I was elected, but frankly, he's like a man who keeps farting in a room and asking what the smell is. He's the problem. And unless I really just can't believe that the Labour leadership and Millbank want this election in London to be about how you, as a London voter, feel about the Blairite project. Because by forcing Frank Dobson onto the people of London, we're going to have a referendum on Blairism by 6 million voters less than 18 months before a general election. I just can't believe that the spin doctors and the PR people at Millbank really want to see the outcome of that, because I fear that the outcome, and I genuinely fear this, Anne, will be Stephen Norris.
Well, I would disagree there, Billy, because what the members of the London Labour Party want and what people in London will want to see when we have that election is a mayor that's good for London, and that's Frank Dobson.
The London Labour Party voted against Frank Dobson, Anne.
They didn't. The Electoral College was agreed.
60% of the members voted against him.
Well, 40% of the membership Frank won, and I think that's a major achievement when you consider the way the process went.
not majority, though, is it, Anne?
It's obvious. It was the majority in the Electoral College which Ken supported. Ken supported the Electoral College for the election of Tony Blair. For John Prescott, he never complained about an Electoral College then.
Well, look,
it
Frank
seems he
Dobson
only complains when he
Frank
loses
Dobson
it.
is complaining about it now, Anne. Frank Dobson himself complains about this. So why should the rest of us be happy with it if even Frank Dobson isn't happy with it?
Well, it's the rules that we've got at the moment, and that's what we're saying. But Frank has made it very, very clear, and he's sort of championed his way through a process that has been difficult for all of us, and we accept that. But at the end of the day, he's our candidate.
Even your own councillors have voted by a majority that they're in favour of...
Not the councillors, no.
I mean, I have a lot of sympathy.
No, that wasn't a council meeting.
And I have a lot of sympathy for Frank Dobson. I think he's a very good person. I think he probably would make a good mayor. But I think the general perception inside the party and also among the voters in London is that he is already a lame duck candidate. And I think that's really unfortunate. And the party has the opportunity over the next few weeks to do something about this. There is a precedent. Rodri Morgan is now the General Secretary in the Welsh Assembly. The sky hasn't fallen in, the world hasn't ended, the party carries on. There's a possibility, chance for us to go all together forward towards the next election instead of having this forthcoming mayoral election as a referendum on the Blairite programme.
There's no London MP agreeing with you on that. The main unions and some of them that supported Ken Billy are actually saying that we accept the results, because that's when you play in a team and you're a member of a party, that's what you do, and that's what Ken has always done in the past.
And when the feelings are this strongly held, there is every possibility, isn't there, at the very least you will get a lot of people who simply refuse to deliver a single leaflet and probably refuse to vote.
There are people who are disappointed that Ken hasn't won. You mentioned in the film, in my own constituency, a very small number of people, not a representation of the whole of the constituency. On a night that England's playing football, it's half-term, not even have noticed that that resolution was being put. You know, so that really isn't something to judge it on. What we're judging it on now is the parties behind Frank, and Frank's out there campaigning on jobs, crime, and that's what he should be doing.
But the point is that people are upset. The thing that upsets people, Anne, is that Ken Livingstone got the majority of the votes but didn't get the nomination. That's the thing you haven't yet addressed. What are we going to do about that? How are we going to make this election about something other than the fact that the majority of Labour Party members voted for Ken Livingstone? It doesn't matter what the MPs do. In the London mayoral election, it's one person, one vote. How are we going to win that election with Frank Dobson as our candidate?
OK, well, we'll see how that turns out. Thank you both very much. Now, in a moment, as the United Nations predicts a massive humanitarian disaster in Mozambique with more than 1 million people said to be on the move and another cyclone brewing, we'll ask whether it's the power of the television image which determines the speed and scale of the disaster relief effort. But before that, a look at today's other main news. To recap on tonight's main news, Newsnight has uncovered evidence that adoption racketeers in Romania are selling babies to the West for as much as $20,000. The European Union has warned Romania to crack down on exploitation in its adoption system before it can even be considered for membership. The President of Nigeria has tonight pleaded for an end to what he called the country's worst bloodletting since its civil war more than 30 years ago. President Obasanjo said he had been saddened and shocked by the ethnic violence of the past 10 days, during which more than 1,000 people had been killed. These are the first pictures filmed by the BBC of the city of Kaduna, where just days ago Muslims and Christians clashed in a bloody battle which left hundreds dead. Christians had been staging a loud but peaceful demonstration against plans by the region's Muslims to introduce strict Islam or Sharia law. Such a law would have banned alcohol and allowed beheading for some crimes.
We want to go. Yes, we want to go. We are Christians in the south. They are not. They don't have anything. They are just killing us for nothing. They steal all our property, all what we have. They burn our houses. So if you can help, let the whole world help us.
Police are now patrolling cities in the north and southeast, and the President has approved the deployment of troops to other potential trouble spots. The introduction of Sharia law has been suspended in 3 states. Meanwhile, community leaders across the country are trying to calm the hatred and end the bloodshed. 27 passengers from the Stansted hijacking last month have had their applications for asylum refused. Only 2 people who were aboard the Afghan airliner will be allowed to stay indefinitely along with their dependents. A number of other cases are still being considered. Police are to investigate the death of a hospital patient who had a healthy kidney removed rather than a diseased one. Graham Reeves from South Wales had been critically ill since the operation in January. It's now just over a month since surgeons at the Prince Philip Hospital in Llanelli removed Mr. Reeves's healthy kidney instead of his diseased one. The blunder left the Korean War veteran critically ill, and this afternoon he died at the Morriston Hospital in Swansea.
To have, this appalling accident, and then the length of time they've been waiting, hoping that he will get better, and now that he's died, I just feel that it's been such a strain for them, and it's just so sad for Graham Reeves himself.
The Royal College of Surgeons has carried out an investigation into what went wrong during the operation, and their findings were due to be released tomorrow. That report has now been put on hold, apparently for legal reasons. Dyfed Powys police have confirmed they'll be investigating the circumstances surrounding Mr. Reeves' death on behalf of the local coroner. The former Chilean dictator, General Augusto Pinochet, will learn tomorrow morning whether he's free to return to Chile. The Home Secretary has said he will give his formal ruling as well as the full reasons on whether to halt extradition proceedings against the general on charges of human rights abuses. The relatives of 2 men found hanged within 6 months of each other in Telford today travel to London to ask the government to treat the deaths as racially motivated murders. The Home Office said tonight it'll look into their cases with great care. The relatives claim West Mercia police bungled their original investigation into Errol McGowan and his nephew, Jason. The Conservative MP Theresa Gorman has been suspended from the Commons for a month. Parliament's sleaze watchdog had found her guilty of failing fully to declare her business interests. She'd been accused of not disclosing property in London and Portugal to the Register of Members' Interests. And on the markets, the FTSE and the Dow Jones both rose. Against the pound, the euro is unchanged, and sterling strengthened against the dollar. More distressing pictures emerged from the flooding in Mozambique today. Britain is supplying 9 helicopters, 2 transport aircraft, nearly 70 boats, almost 40 life rafts, together with volunteers and Land Rovers. This country is the biggest aid donor, and tomorrow an appeal will be kicked off to try to raise more from the public. But why do some disasters seem to attract so much more aid than others? Entire villages underwater, thousands left without their homes, possessions or livelihoods. In what's become a necessary cliché of reporting disaster, this is a cataclysm of biblical proportions. Except that should be was. This was actually 2.5 years ago. More than 3,000 people died when the banks of the Yangtze River swelled, causing China's worst floods in 44 years. More than 15 million people were left homeless. The international community gave China over $131 million, more than 50 million of which came from the World Food Programme. But there were no major appeals in the UK for aid to China. Over 2 months, the crisis was covered 37 times on television. It never led a news bulletin on the BBC. Last October, more than 10,000 people died in Orissa and 7.5 million were left homeless. There were only 19 reports on television, and the international community gave $20 million in aid. Despite running a joint appeal, the Red Cross struggled to raise the £7 million because of a lack of media interest. 2 months later in Venezuela, at least 30,000 people were killed in floods and landslides and more than 100,000 left homeless. Venezuela received a bit more coverage from BBC and ITN and got a bit more money, $27 million. Not nearly enough given the scale of the catastrophe. And again, there were no major appeals in the UK. In the last week, there have already been 30-odd reports on the disaster in Mozambique. The international community has given $20 million already, and the Disaster Emergency Committee today announced the launch of a joint appeal.
In the case of Orissa, which of course was very serious with about 13 million people affected, it did take a little while for the media to begin their coverage, and it came and went very quickly. In Mozambique, it still took a while to get started, but once it has started, it's been sustained day after day, and this has been very important in enabling people to understand the problem.
But according to sources on the committee, when they approached the broadcasters last week, there was, to say the least, a noticeable lack of enthusiasm for an appeal. According to one aid worker, in an allegation denied by the BBC, broadcasters raised doubt about the scale of the disaster. But after a weekend of coverage, including daring rescue efforts and thousands of people struggling for survival, the broadcasters committed themselves.
Very often the media don't stay for the long term in natural disaster situations, but I really hope that they do stay for a long time in Mozambique, because the needs are going to go on for many months. Children are going to need to rebuild their lives, to be protected against illness, to get back to school.
The British people have shown a willingness to express their compassion through charitable giving. Obviously, they can only react when they know what they're reacting to. But how they're told, and how urgently, does seem to determine the quality of their response. Well, we're joined now here in the studio by Fiona Fox of the aid agency CAFOD. Fiona Fox, how do you decide which emergencies you're going to appeal for?
Well, there's two answers to that question. The first one is that if the agencies don't have enough money in their emergency budget and need to appeal to the British public for more, then we will call on the broadcasters and the media for an appeal. Unfortunately, if there isn't enough media coverage and the media tell us that there isn't going to be sustained coverage, that they're pulling their correspondents out, the reality we're dealing with is that we probably won't appeal, because we actually need the media images to raise the public awareness.
What sort of media images do you need?
We need the reality. I mean, one of the points I think that's the problem about this is that the overall decline in media coverage of third world issues means that people don't know where Mozambique is. They don't know anything about the country, and they're not going to respond because somebody in Wales has just been flooded. They're not going to feel that empathy. So actually, at that moment, we need the media images to tell the truth, not to massage them, not to hype them, but in Mozambique, in Sudan, in Orissa, the reality, which is hundreds of thousands of people suffering.
This is a very familiar complaint from charities concerned with the developing world, and I'm not even sure it's true that there's less coverage now of Mozambique than there was in some golden age 20 or 30 years ago. There's been a phenomenal amount of coverage of the Mozambique flooding. There was a great deal of coverage of Orissa. There's a great deal of coverage of many other disasters.
But Jeremy, that's news coverage. I wasn't talking about that. Our problem is, and there's a report out this week that shows that in overall, the coverage of third world issues in the British media, on the BBC, on ITV, on all the stations, has declined by 50% in the past 10 years. Now,
why should that make a difference to appeals for aid?
Massively, because if there was massive floods in London, people in Wales would give money because they've got relatives in London, they know London, they have sympathy with London. When we have a disaster in Mozambique, or indeed in the Democratic Republic of Congo, which isn't being covered, people aren't going to give money without the images because they don't know anything about that country. Now, yes, there's been news coverage, but only of Mozambique, not of the Democratic Republic of Congo, not of Burundi, not of many other tragedies. So we're being dictated to by the news. I'm not blaming news because they do disasters, but what we want is overall more coverage of third world issues.
So you want more disaster coverage from different countries?
No, we want more coverage. We want two things. We want more coverage of long-term development and about the issues of the third world in the media. We don't want a 50% decline. We want to see more coverage. But secondly, we want consistency in the news coverage. So I had two people in my office last week begging me to get media coverage for the Democratic Republic of Congo because they have to give half rations now.
What is happening in the Democratic Republic of Congo?
There is a major war involving 5 regional African countries. One of the reasons there's no helicopters...
Oh, that war, right.
Yes,
okay.
that war. One of the reasons there's no helicopters in Mozambique at the moment is because many of them are involved in the war in Democratic Republic of Congo, which the public don't know about, even though tens of thousands of people have been displaced and are suffering. The reason we're giving half rations, or some agencies are, in that conflict is because there hasn't been media coverage. Now, why Mozambique and not Democratic Republic of Congo?
Well, I suggest to you it may be partly because this is a natural disaster, in the sense that in the case of flooding in Mozambique or the famine in Ethiopia, people are suffering through no fault of their own. Is it your experience that it is harder to engage human sympathy where the cause of the catastrophe, the suffering for civilians, is man-made?
I would say the compassion of the British public knows no bounds. And actually, if we go to the public and look at their response, that question is irrelevant. We've had natural disasters here in Mozambique, but in Sudan, the famine, we raised millions and millions of pounds, even though everyone was saying compassion fatigue. Claire Short, the Secretary of State for Development, was saying this is a war, we need a political solution, and yet people gave millions of pounds. So what people respond to, Jeremy, is suffering, human suffering.
Regardless of the cause?
Regardless of the cause. Of course, all the agencies are doing advocacy to try and get political solutions, but I still think, irrespective of the cause, the response from the public has been unbelievably generous, whether it's a natural disaster or a war.
Is it legitimate, in your view, for aid agencies, I'm not accusing you of this, but is it legitimate for aid agencies to manipulate media coverage in order to excite compassion and donation?
No, it's not legitimate. And the times when that has been done, aid agencies have paid the price. Notably in 1996 in it was then Zaire, where aid agencies inflated the statistics, and then people were seen to be healthy and well, and the media used it against us. So no, it's not legitimate. But might I say, it's not the problem. Most of the time we are battling with the fact that people don't know about humanitarian disasters affecting hundreds of thousands of people. CAFAD is permanently trying to raise these issues in the media. It's not the problem that we're trying to hype them. The problem is that human suffering in certain parts of the world is being ignored. We welcome, by the way, the massive coverage from Mozambique. It's fantastic. It means that because the public respond, we will raise millions of pounds for those people, and that's great. But we're still left in aid agencies constantly wondering why one African disaster and not another.
Fiona Fox, thank you very much indeed. Thanks. Tomorrow morning's front pages, almost all of them have pictures of that baby born to a mother sheltering in a tree in Mozambique. There it is on the front page of the Times, and the news that Jack Straw is trying to stem the flood of asylum applications. The same picture as the front page of the Telegraph, and Pinochet is likely to be free at 8 o'clock tomorrow morning, according to the Telegraph. The Daily Express has pictures of the same baby, miracle amid the misery. Same pictures on the front page of The Guardian, which also has news that President Pinochet, or ex-President Pinochet, is likely to fly home tomorrow morning, or be told tomorrow morning he can fly home. And apparently, according to the Financial Times, Berlin is ready to concede on its choice of candidate for the IMF. That's all from Newsnight for tonight. I'll be back with more tomorrow. Until then, from all of us on the programme, good night.
Hello there. Cold winds and wintry showers today. All change though for tomorrow. Now, away from the wintry showers today, we did have the sunshine, winter sunshine. Teignmouth, 10 hours of it during today, not bad at all. Tomorrow though, not quite as sunny at all. Here's how we're looking at the moment. These run of cold northwesterly winds are going to come to an end. Low pressure out towards the northwest. That will sweep in across northern areas, changing the wind direction, pushing in a lot more cloud and some wet weather too. It's going to be windy tomorrow as well, and as the wetter weather starts to ease away, northern parts of Scotland could well find some severe gales during tomorrow night, some cold winds around too. Now, it's quite cold at the moment. Temperatures are dropping under some clear skies, and across central and eastern areas we're looking at temperatures down to -1 and -2, and there could well be a few icy patches following those showers. Now, the showers are dying away. You can see not too many of them showing up here. To the northwest though, things are changing. With all this cloud here, it's thickening up, the rain's on the way, just showing on the edge of the radar picture there. And that wet weather will sweep its way across Northern Ireland, across Scotland, into northern England and into Wales too. And on the leading edge of that, we're likely to find some snow, especially across eastern parts of Scotland, northeastern England, as it runs into the cold air. So some heavy rain on the way for Northern Ireland, Scotland and northern England, preceded for a time by some snow, and that means some difficult driving conditions, possibility of some localised flooding. So it could be quite tricky first thing, a combination of the rain and the snow. I don't think the snow is going to last too long though. It will fairly readily turn back to rain again, but the rain will hang around southern Scotland, Northern Ireland and northern England. And after a bright start in the southeast, we'll see some patchy rain moving in across southern parts of England and Wales. Across northern Scotland it should turn brighter, colder with some sunshine and a few wintry showers, and it's probably going to feel quite chilly tomorrow despite temperatures of 9 or 10 because it is going to be windy. Now the winds will blow the wet weather away during Friday. Start off quite wet in the south, still some heavy rain around first thing, but it will move away. The sunshine will come out, but watch out for those showers. Again, they'll be wintry. The air is turning colder, in particular some wintry showers across in Scotland. Temperature-wise, well, 5 in the north, about 8 or 9 in the south, but again, it is going to feel cold. And again, that cold air with us during Saturday, again, more of those wintry showers. See you tomorrow.
My name is Renee, and I'm 23, and this is my first time donating. I have such a healthy line of genetics to pass along.
Nobody wants a donor who's too heavy.
Hi, my name's Elizabeth.
Blue-eyed egg donor.
Hi, my name is Elisa Marchand.
A bright child.
She's musical.
She looks like you.
Great facility with languages.
Here's Angel 195. She's adorable.
Textbook uterus.
Beautiful embryos.
I'm not doing it for the money.
Interesting way to get pregnant.
Modern Times investigates the price of eggs. Next Wednesday at 9 on BBC Two.
He brought this to himself. He had to suffer.
I put everything that I owned in the world on the line.
He's a greedy person. Charles Dance and Nadeem Sawalha take centre stage in a dramatisation of an epic legal battle. Justice in Wonderland. Sunday at 10:05 on BBC Two.
Late night comedy now on BBC Two. Take your partners for a mince through the Black Forest.